Okay, this week we're talking about roots and shoots. So if you remember, on the first week we talked about plant classification and plants being divided into non-vascular and vascular, and we are primarily going to speak about angiosperms here. Angiosperms are broken out into two types of plants, monocots and dicots. So monocots have one seed leaf or cotyledon. They have parallel veins. They tend to have long, narrow leaves. Their vascular bundles are scattered. This is where sugars and water move through the plants. Floral parts are in multiples of 3. With dicots, there are 2 seed leaves. They are broad leaves. They have a network of veins, and the vascular bundles are in a ring. And floral parts are in multiples of 4 or 5. So plant cells are produced in the meristems. Meristems are regions of rapidly dividing, undifferentiated growth, and they're broken into 2 types of meristems. There's primary and secondary, found both in stems and roots. So, as I said, this is where cells actively divide. It's sometimes found in buds. Primary growth happens at the apical meristem. That's at the tips of roots and stems to increase the length. And then secondary growth is the lateral meristem. And this is how plants gain girth. Now, only woody plants have secondary growth. And when you're talking about angiosperms, woody plants that are not gymnosperms are dicotyledons. So monocotyledons are not going to have secondary growth. Okay, so you can see the apical meristem in a root tip, and then here is the inside of a tree trunk that you can see the different layers. We'll talk a little more about these, but this is the lateral meristem cambium. That's where active growth happens. Okay, you've got cambium and you've got cork cambium, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, secondary growth increases the girth of woody plants. Growth comes from the lateral meristem, and so vascular cambium produces secondary xylem and secondary phloem, and cork cambium produces bark and other tissues. So here's your secondary dicot stem. You can see vascular cambium is pointed out here. The red portion is this year's wood, and then cork cambium is on the outside here. Okay, again, here's your vascular cambium, and this year's wood is outside of that previous slide, and that is considered sapwood. And then cork cambium continues to be on the outside. Okay, and then vascular cambium once again is on the outside of the new growth, and the cork cambium is outside of that. Here we are again. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's where you get your growth rings. Okay, so back to shoots. Shoots are above ground, and this is where your leaves and your stems are. And then roots are underground, and we'll delve a little more deeply into roots in a moment. So when you're talking about plant morphology, the basic plant parts of a plant obviously are roots, and this is the absorbing or anchoring organ of the plant. It's also a place for storage of sugars. And then you have shoots, which include stems. These are supportive and conductive. This is where the water and sugars flow through the plant. It's also a place where storage may occur. And then leaf is a photosynthetic organ, and those are sometimes modified, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so we're talking about plant roots. They are where the plants are anchored. This is where water is absorbed. This is also where mineral nutrients are absorbed. This is where photosynthates, which are the sugars, are stored, and that's how perennials survive underground. And it's also a place where you can actually propagate. Plant roots are negatively phototropic. That means they're not affected by light. They're not going to grow towards the light. They don't have any chlorophyll. They have no nodes, and you'll see what that means in a little bit. Okay, here's your apical meristem. It's found at the root tip. This is where the new cells develop. It's covered by a root cap, and what that does is it protects it from damage as it passes through the soil. Okay, the lateral or secondary root is a branch root of another root. You can see that here. The primary root is growing down. The secondary root is shooting off of another root. So root hairs are hair-like projections. They increase the surface area of the root. They allow more water and mineral intake, and they're located behind the meristem. They're also associated with mycorrhizal fungi, and that's something we'll talk about later on in the quarter. This is an organism that has a symbiotic relationship with plants in order for plants to get hold of more nutrients or be protected from plant disease, etc. But we'll get more into that later. Okay, root hairs are for root water absorption, as I mentioned. So you've got tap roots versus fibrous roots. So tap roots are typical of dicot plants. They have the ability to store food. They're not really that common though when you're talking, especially when you're talking about trees. Most trees do not have tap roots, but certainly dandelions do. If you've ever tried to pull one, you know that's true. Fibrous roots, mostly found in monocot plants, but they're also found in dicots. They radiate out into the soil from the base of the plant. So fibrous roots grow in the upper 30 inches of soil to absorb rainwater and surface supplied minerals from organic matter breakdown. Tap roots grow down deep to absorb moisture from water tables and aquifers. And this is one advantage that some invasive species have. There's a salt tamarix that grows in the southwest that can get to water that the native plants can't get to, and it tends to basically eliminate its competition through getting that water. Okay, here's some examples of tap roots: carrots, beets, and sweet potatoes. Now, sweet potatoes are not the same as potatoes. They're in a different family, and they are roots. Potatoes are actually stems, and we'll talk about that in the next presentation. Okay, here's an example of tree roots. Most of them are located in the top 6 to 24 inches of the soil, and they will occupy an area 4 times the diameter of the tree crown. So when you are planting a tree, you need to know that, and there may be things that your neighbor may be doing in their garden that may be affecting your tree. So that's something to look out for. And so you can see here's your anchor roots, and people walking around on sidewalks, but the lateral roots continue on. So here are some modified roots. Here's a prop root that is found in corn, buttresses, storage roots that we just talked about, and pneumatophores, which you would find in a wetland. These structures that are coming up into the from the water are providing oxygen to the roots of the plants.